Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Barr of Rider University. I'm going to be serving as the moderator for this session. So just a few housekeeping items before we begin. What you can do if you would like, you can go into the upper right-hand corner of your screen where it says view and choose the speaker, so that if you only want to see the speaker for the presentation, most certainly do that. We're going to have 45 minutes of this presentation. The presentation will be about 30 to 35 minutes, and that will leave us with about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A at the end. I'm going to provide a 2-minute warning before we begin with the Q&A session. As you listen to the presentation, please feel free to leave any questions you have in the chat, and at the end, Adriane will facilitate that Q&A session. This session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be recorded, please feel free to turn off your camera. So with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters and our colleagues from Felician University School of Education. Presenting today are Associate Dean Dr. Charity Dacey, faculty members Dr. Eloise Stewart and Dr. Karen Pezzolla, Director of Field Experiences, Ms. Adriane Golden, and the Dean of the School of Education, Dr. Stephanie McGowan. Together, they're going to bring us a presentation titled Using Data-Driven Dialogue to Engage in the AAQEP Continuous Improvement Project.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Stephanie McGowan. I am the Dean of the School of Education at Felician University. And as that very brilliant introduction already alluded to, I am honored today to be co-presenting with my colleagues, Dr. Dacey, who is the Associate Dean, Professor Adriane Golden, who is our Director of Internship and Assessment, Dr. Karen Pezzolla, who is an Associate Professor in the School of Education, and also Dr. Eloise Stewart, who is an Assistant Professor in the School of Education. Next slide, please. So the first question that should always be asked when watching a presentation is, who are these people and why are they talking to us today? And so I am thrilled to share with you who we are as a Felician family. The School of Education is a part of Felician University. We have 2 campuses, one in Rutherford, one in Lodi. We are very much a part of the Franciscan tradition. And we have been focused, as a matter of fact, our university just celebrated its 80th birthday in being a part of the caring and competency, compassionate focus on developing future educators. Teacher education has been at the heart of Felician University since its inception, and we are honored to continue that longstanding tradition. One of the traditions that we have really embraced, as we are about to talk and share with all of you about our journey in utilizing data and telling our story of who we are at Felician as we prepare for our AAQEP visit, is really emphasizing the need for lifelong learning, and not just about what we say to our candidates in our programs, but what we believe ourselves as the professionals, as those who are modeling for them. And so we are trying to demonstrate best practices as we go through this authentic process and really tell our story of who we are. Our total enrollment is about 2,400 students, undergraduate and graduate. We are a very small, intimate community. We serve many first-generation college students, and many of them with the dreams and hopes of going back to the very communities that they came from across New Jersey and outside of New Jersey to inspire young people to enter this profession. And what I, of course, believe to be most exciting is not just about what we teach them here, but fostering that passion for being life changers. Ultimately, we all are committed to preparing great teachers. But we believe very strongly that here at Felician, we don't just prepare educators, we truly prepare life changers. Next slide, please. So it's been a real interesting road. Before my colleagues can really discuss with all of you about how we use data-driven dialogue to engage in this continuous improvement process, it's really understanding how did we get here. I joined the Felician family in August of 2017. And many of my colleagues who are on this call know that that was right when universities and colleges were asked to reapprove their teacher education programs. And it really gave us a unique opportunity as an institution to ask some very, very important questions. Number one, who are we? Number two, what impact do we want to have in the educational community? And what do our school partners believe is the greatest need, and that we could be the stewards of that important work? And with that in mind and getting that feedback, we looked over all of the programming that we had been doing in the School of Education. And we really focused on these 4 essential places specific to teacher education. The first was early childhood. Felician, again, has had a storied history in the preparation, particularly in early childhood and elementary education. We knew very deeply to our core that this was a lane that we wanted to stay in, but we had to really ask a very challenging question, and that was, although we are preparing dynamic educators, are they prepared for the challenges and, quite frankly, the unforeseen challenges that we've all experienced the last 2 years of really preparing educators to address the needs of all children? And we always use the word all in capital letters for a reason, right? Schools are evolving, and so should our teacher education programs. And that is why the conversation about continuous improvement, it's never being satisfied about where we are, because the schools that we serve and we prepare teachers for are constantly evolving. And so like them, we evolve too. And we decided to focus on these 4 areas: early childhood, elementary with middle school, secondary education. But what made it unique for us at Felician was that we decided to do a blended curriculum that ensured that every candidate left with a minimum of 2 licenses: regular education and also teacher of students with disabilities. We felt that this got back to the hallmark of who Felician was, who our Felician sisters have been, and their contribution to the community, and really planting our stake in the commitment that every graduate, every teacher prepared at Felician University was prepared to address all of the challenges of the children that as they presented themselves, both documented and undocumented, in the classroom. And so that we could really be the stewards to our school partners, that they could be assured that the candidates we prepared were ready, able, willing, and ready to be that life changer for them as they were when they were with us. Next slide. So with this, I am thrilled to share that over the past, gosh, it's been 2 years now, we have had a real deep conversation about, just as when we approached 2017 and what programs did we feel were a fit for Felician, we had the same conversation about national accreditation, and where we felt that we could best tell our story, and that Felician would be recognized for its unique qualities. And also with the understanding that despite our size, we are purposeful and we're needed. And we really found a home with AAQEP. And so at this time, we have moved forward. We are part of the pilot group. We are preparing to move forward with our submission and our visitation date that's coming up in a few short months. And and hopefully the opportunity to work with many people who are on this call today in sharing our journey, so that if this is something worth pursuing for them, we could share what the experience has been like for us. And so I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleague, Dr. Charity Dacey, who has been working very closely with each of our faculty members in how we address the new AAQEP standards and how we stay focused and really use our North Star of continuous improvement. Dr. Dacey.
Thank you, Dr. McGowan. And we are very excited about engaging in the AAQEP process. And I've wanted to highlight here first in the corner, the top right, AAQEP has rigorous standards and rigorous aspects, and we've gotten to know those. And I think many of you on this call today, I see familiar faces. You've done the training as well. You've done the modules. Some of you are now serving as reviewers, all things that I think are really helpful to engage. And I want to first throw out a really large disclaimer that we are talking about our processes and what we've done. We are in no way endorsed or could be, at all talking for AAQEP. The Association for the Advancement of Quality in Teacher Preparation is something that we're very drawn to, and we'll talk about why that is. I think Dr. McGowan really touched upon it, because there's such an alignment between our mission in the School of Ed and at Felician, helping to prepare caring, competent educators. In terms of AAQEP, so far, they seem to be the caring, competent accreditors. There's really, those training modules and the opportunities to review are only part and parcel to probably the third, and this is where we'll launch into some of the more content-based pieces of today. We would recommend to other programs who go through this process to engage in the proposal. That was something that timeline-wise can, vary from program to program, and our timelines were pretty tight. We did that proposal last summer, but I think the benefits far exceed, the challenges of even the timeline, because in doing the proposal for AAQEP, you fully have the opportunity to create yourself a roadmap for standards 1 and 2. And so when you look at standard 1 and the focus, the capacity to support the success for all learners, and then standard 2, which is really addressing, adapting to working in a variety of contexts and growing as professionals, it's really the meat and potatoes of this work. And so that process sparked so much thought and so much planning and so much analysis and connection making. We sat in Dr. McGowan's office one day and wrote it all down on the whiteboard, what we had initially captured in the proposal. It provided a really helpful framework to move forward with. And so I just think in terms of this process, one of the things that we're going to focus on is, the ways in which we've collaboratively examined our data. And the data that we mapped came from that proposal last summer. And it really does identify strengths and areas where our candidates are doing really well. And it also illuminates some potential areas for continuous improvement. And it was last year at the symposium that I attended a session where someone recommended this text. So we're going to talk about the Wellman and Lippman text. It's a facilitator's guide to collaborative inquiry. And one of the reasons why this has been so pivotal in embracing this process is because all of us are very committed to not jumping ahead and moving into action about areas where we want to maybe tinker or think we have to change something. We wanted to engage authentically in the process of looking at the data and what does the data say. So that's something that I think when we talk about this work, it's really very helpful. So we wanted to provide some examples, and that's why we went into thread 4, which is all about exploring experiences and ideas, research and assessment practices. And I think knowing that we all have these research backgrounds, one of the things that's been very gratifying in doing this work is making some of those connections in its purest form. So I thought I would just start with a quick story. 7 years ago at AAQEP, I was in a session. It was like a Spencer Foundation reception, and everybody was like standing around eating at a mashed potato bar. And we all just felt so like, everybody's mingling, and it was post-session. And I instantly recognized Lee Shulman because I know I'm a nerd anyway, but I really was like, oh my God, is that really Lee Shulman? And my colleagues, one of which is in the background of the picture here, she said, why don't you guys just go over and say hi to him? Like, this is a good opportunity. And my colleague was like, I'm not talking to someone like that. He's too famous. I said, all right, I'll say hi. And we ended up having a really interesting conversation. And as an educational psychologist, it was so gratifying because, as we all know, in the 80s, he had such a pivotal kind of contribution to teacher education when he talked about subject matter knowledge and pedagogy, and how, they're often treated as mutually exclusive, and how he thought the teacher ed program should be combining these two knowledge fields. And that was one of the things that I thought of right out of the gate with AAQEP, with Standard 1, where you're looking at that. And the thing that I bring this up for is because he said something that night, and he said, after, when you're thinking about this conversation, go back and Google my quote. And I have Googled his quote. It's right here. And he said basically that one of the things about teaching is that it's perhaps the most complex, most challenging, and most demanding, subtly nuanced, and frightening activity that our species has ever invented. And that anyone in the business of teaching or teacher education, if you keep that in mind as your North Star, and you do in all of your endeavors justice to that idea, if you honor the complexity of teaching. And he talked about it not just in terms of the act of teaching, but in our research on teaching, in our work as creating teacher educators and curriculum. And he said, even specifically, in the assessment of ourselves as programs and our assessment of students, if we honor the complexity, you will end up getting far more interesting and authentic results than if you just kind of try to, go through the activity on a surface level for assessment. And as a big, assessment person, I just think that this is a really very important thing to keep in mind. And, I've been through a CAPE process. AAQEP just allows a better space for this type of work. There's not so many constraints in that regard to honor the complexity of teaching and to honor the context and the different challenges that we all face, and to be able to address those in real ways. And so I think that's one of the things that I think when we talk about this tool of collaborative inquiry, I hearken back to the Lee Shulman kind of perspective. And so now we're just going to talk about some of the supports, the multiple supports that when you visit and revisit, as we all do, the purpose of assessment and evaluation, it's all about continuous improvement, and we want excellence. We're all striving for a better experience for our students, for our faculty. And so far in this journey, again, we are not the model by any stretch. This is just our way of navigating this journey. But in that regard, the natural place to start is with our data collection process. And so I'm going to now turn it over to Miss Adriane Golden.
Thank you, Dr. Dacey. I joined the administrative team at the School of Education in June of 2021, just as we were getting ready to begin this proposal writing. And so we knew that we needed to have 3 years of data to include in our AAQEP proposal and our quality assurance report. And so the first thing that we did was take a look at what data we did have, both from our field evaluations, the observation and conference report, and the clinical competency inventory, but also the surveys that we had sent out to employers, our completers, and our alumni. And prior to my arrival, all of this data had been collected in Microsoft Forms. So when we delve into what we had in the Forms Excel spreadsheet, we found very quickly it was not user-friendly. It was difficult to really get into the data and see which pieces we needed and kind of extract all of that. So one thing that we did moving forward in the efforts for continuous improvement is to launch a pilot of Qualtrics. So we started that with the fall semester, and we have been collecting our data through Qualtrics. We've gotten great feedback from our partners in terms of how easy it is to enter the data, the fact that they can actually access their submissions, which they were not able to do when it came to Microsoft Forms. But again, this is all continuous improvement. It didn't make the task of delving into the data that we needed for our AAQEP report any easier. So Dr. Dacey did do a lot of work with our graduate assistant in painstakingly going through all of that data from Microsoft Forms and turning it into pivot tables. And so one of the reasons we wanted to just touch on this is that thinking about something as basic as how you're collecting the data really can impact your whole process when it comes to this accreditation with AAQEP.
And Adriane is being very humble. She operates daily with her foot in 2 different places. One is in the old world and one is in the new world with Qualtrics. And that's something that, you know, we all pivoted, right, at COVID. I think amongst us, we've learned to continuously pivot. It's like teaching virtually and in person now. We're constantly in the old world data because we need to be. And it was collected, it's there. We had to get creative on analyzing it. But we also have our foot in the door of the future. And that with Qualtrics really started with our surveys. So we created first and foremost the employer exit survey and alumni survey in Qualtrics, and everything that Adriane is describing is true. It's just seamless, it's smooth. Hey, we've got 1 year of data there. We don't have 3 years of survey results. We have a pilot that we did of this survey data. But so one of the first things that we did was we sat down and we said, well, if we're thinking in the future about what we want to have happen, let's make these surveys and let's make them in a very purposeful way. So we aligned each survey question to the aspects and the standards of AAQEP so that we would know up front, well, here's the questions we know that we want to ask, but where do they fit on the map? Which standard, which aspect? And so that was really one of the first things that we felt like we really needed to share with our advisory board, our partners, because obviously it's all about partnership. And so we took a look at that first round of surveys and we asked them everything from the very technical questions about how could we get our response rate up? Like we don't have a tons of responses here from employers, et cetera. But I really liked how Dr. McGowan brought it to the level about our true essential question, which is we asked the advisory board point blank, the purpose of going through this data together tonight is to talk about preparing future teachers, leaders, behaviorists, you know, in this post-COVID employment environment. What are the skills, the knowledge, and the dispositions that they all need to be successful in the schools that we work with, in the agencies in which the behaviorists work? And that really grounded the discussion so that when you're looking at data, it's not just this, oh, here we go, next slide, And I think it really made a huge difference because, again, instead of talking on a surface level, and here's an example of, one of these, we aligned our question about creating positive environments. How are our graduates doing on that to support the learning and development of all students? We aligned the question with the aspects. We showed them the results. And yet we, as much as we only have a few responses, to get their anecdotal feedback about what's doing, like what do they need, what's working, what needs do they have? I mean, right now, obviously, fast forward, we're in a full-fledged teacher shortage. So there's a lot of needs, but in terms of looking at the candidates, their responses were fascinating. We talked a lot about technology. There was one question on there about technology. We spent way too long. And my type A, I'm like, oh, we got to go to the next slide. It's really important that we did spend time talking fully about how our survey questions need to change, because the cursory technology question that we always have asked on these types of endeavors is very different now, because the world in the last 2 years has shifted so much in terms of what do we mean when we say prepared well to deal with technology as a teacher. So, we always like to highlight the positive, and we got a lot of positive responses from our surveys. And in the advisory board, we had that substantiated. But what was really very telling, and I'm going to, refer to Mark for a second, because he, on the last cohort call, we get in these lovely writing groups and you work with a small group every month and you bring a piece of your data to them and you talk through and problematize whatever it is that you need feedback on. And he called the survey exercise. He's like, well, we have these key informants, right? We have certain people that we can ask who are anchors, who will illuminate what it is when you look at a quantitative measure. Oh, strongly agree, great. Well, what does it mean when you're talking about implementing class-wide management systems? And then that person can tell you all about it. So now I think with all of our surveys, not just because we have a low response rate, and that will get better. We're going to send it out again at the end of this semester. We'll, continue to work with the New Jersey Department of Education to locate our alums and, starting a LinkedIn site. That helped tremendously. I just invited all the people in my own network. And then now we've got alums in there, and I can reach out to one of them on the LinkedIn site and say, hey, I want to ask you a few questions about this. And it's because we got a survey response, and it's qualitative data where they're talking about a very particular aspect of the program. And then I can say, can you tell me your experience about that? It's not a focus group where you bring everybody in. It's not even on Zoom. It's just having some background and to delve a little deeper. And so the writing cohort, I do think that's one of the things that I would highlight on our journey that's been very helpful, because when you bring things to the group, it's a very practice-driven group. There's a lot of deliverables, and I'm just highlighting one aspect that I just gleaned from last month's meeting. There was a particular presenter who brought to everyone how this person highlighted in their quality assurance report the numbers. They had small numbers too in all their surveys. And they said, rather than having a table for each and every single question, here's how I presented the data. I compiled everything on that standard and that aspect, condensed it down, delineated which is from an employer versus which is from a completer or an alumni, and I present it in one table. And for someone like me who's in the throes of doing this right now, I literally went back to every standard and every aspect and took all my individual tables and said, hey, Richie, can we work together and combine these? This is such a better way of presenting it. So the practical tips, I just can't say enough good things about, when you're doing this work, it's those little things, those tips that you need that can be really just so helpful. So with that in mind, we thought that one of the things that anyone who's looking at doing this would appreciate is just giving like a mini roadmap map. So I chose aspect 1C as a good example. That's culturally responsive practices, including intersectionality. I think we all know the aspect, but the intersectionality of race, ethnicity, class, gender identity and expression, sexual orientation, and the impact of language acquisition and literacy development on learning. And so for each aspect, this is what we have presented. So there's always an essential question. Standard 1, where aspect 1C falls, is at the end of the program, are completers ready to fill their target professional role effectively, right? So then the question leads to like, what evidence do we have of that? And so this is where I pulled from, and this is from, that mapping that we did in the proposal that then we wrote on the whiteboard as well. We obviously have a course on that. So we highlighted culturally responsive practice course, but then we have all of our instruments, and many of these instruments you guys use as well here in New Jersey. The observation and conference form. Standard 2, learning differences, addresses 1C. The clinical competency inventory that we use for obviously clinical interns. Standard 2, designing and implementing instruction to ensure an inclusive learning environment for all learners is a direct link here to 1C, as is standard 2.2, which is all about incorporating multicultural content and perspectives. And 2.3, which is all about implementing strategies to support learners whose first language is not English. So 3 aspects of the CCI. Then we've got the EdTPA rubric. Alignment is right there, planning to support varied student learning needs. Then we've got the surveys, which on the prior slide you saw an example of, linking and aligning every single piece of evidence to the aspect and the standard. The question here is, and I don't know the answer. I have absolutely no problem saying, I don't know. Is this too much? Is this too little? Is this just right? Like Goldilocks, I feel like I'm going into the room trying to decide which bed. We're new to this, and so I don't know. And we'll get that feedback, I'm sure. And if anything, I'd always rather be over-prepared than under-prepared. So should there probably be this number of boxes? I can tell from Stephanie, your face, probably not. But, the point is we got to do our best to strike a balance. And not every standard and aspect is like this. This engagement has led to certain standards where I'm like, ooh, we don't have a lot of evidence in certain areas. And I'm not saying that that's okay. I'm just saying the act of doing this work, that reflective piece of looking at this, doing the inventory, is helpful because it then creates some priorities instantly without jumping ahead. It does create a like, oh, well, what kind of things should we have here? Let me look around. And I'm not really going to go in depth to this because I think the examples are much more interesting to talk through. But here's an example for standard 2. In terms of professional competence and growth, you can see like this is my, again, inventory, 2A, 2B, 2C. What are the pieces of evidence that we have that I need to gather? So that's when I went into all these old forms. We made pivot tables, we created tables so that we have the data to look at. And looking at the data now is the piece that I think is helpful to highlight an example. So that's where, like, this is, again, I just picked an example from learning differences, since that's like the theme, the aspect 1C that we're going with. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Dr. Pezzolla, to talk a little bit more about how we looked at this and how it came to be. And actually, I realize it's Dr. Eloise Stewart who's going to do this piece. We flipped the order. So Dr. Stewart, I turn it over to you.
Dr. Stewart, before you begin, we have about 3 more minutes before we go into Q&A.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dacey. The collaborative learning model is basically how we talk. We meet each week and we look at the data that's presented to us. It's just a way that we make those connections. We use the text, again, the data-driven dialogue by Willman and Lifton, and they talked about 3 phases to this cycle. And the first phase is like activating and engaging. The second phase is organizing and integrating. And the third phase is exploring and discovering. So we meet every week as a group of 5. And according to Wellman and Lifton, this is a nice group size to flush out different ideas and look at, as we look at the data and look at the diverse points of views. With activating and engaging, this phase occurs it occurs before the data is even presented. This phase allows the participants to share what they think they will see in the data, and they would think about why they think this might be so. We ask ourselves those questions like, what assumptions are we making? What predictions are we making? What questions are we asking? And what are some possibilities that we're using as well? And one of the examples that they were used, they say when you're separate, you need to be separating predictions from assumptions, because often this can be difficult for our group members. And knowing the difference between assumptions and predictions is very, is very important. They gave an example of a group of 5th grade students, and they said that one participant came and said that girls would outperform the boys in this standard-based assessment. And on the surface, this is like a prediction, but if it's left unsaid, just the assumption that girls had better reading skills and better habits, this would influence their performance on math exams that emphasize word problems. But if the prediction remains unexamined, the logic embedded in the assumption would have been invisible to the rest of the group. So surfacing the assumptions often, opens productive dialogue. So as a skilled facilitator, and I credit Dr. Dacey for this, she put together this group, and this group, it includes the dispositions of people, being open-minded, willingness to listen to perspectives, and, and just confident in their collective ability of the group to solve these instructional problems. Many groups, you really just cannot overlook activating and engaging stage. So because a lot will get lost in the data and the opinions. So the next phase that was talked about by Lifton is organizing and integrating. This is like you're generalizing theories. And when you think about generalizing theories, what inferences or explanations, conclusions are we drawing? What data sources that we might explore to verify our explanations? And what are some of the solutions that we might explore as a result of our conclusions? So what data are we going to collect to guide our implementation? So it's important that, skillful groups, when we have a skillful group, we develop multiple theories about causation, because they attempt to, you can generate theories from this. And we search for possible stories within our data. And at this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Pezzolla.
Karen, I think you're muted.
Yes, the pros and cons of Zooming. Jason, I'm going to take a 4-minute outline and turn it into a 30-second presentation. I know we're stuck on a lot of time. I promise. I will briefly speak to you about the second phase of the collaborative learning cycle, which is called exploring and discovering. In this phase, basically, Wellman and Lifton want us to understand that the heart of collaborative inquiry takes place in this phase, which is basically, what is the data saying to us? What does it look like? And so during this phase, we have very robust conversations, very robust discussions on what the data actually looks like. One of the things we came up with was a theory of causation. When we looked at the data on the particular slide that Dr. Dacey shared with you, we saw that there were changes in the numbers, things that we there you go, things that we couldn't understand. And one of the theories of causation we came up with was, could this be because of the pandemic? And yeah, it could be. But, you know, Lipman and Wellman and Lipton say that you have to have at least 3 potential theories of causation before you put any theory of action into use. And so we're going to continue to look at the data. At this time, I'll finish it up, Jason. At this time, we're continuing to look deeply at the data to develop additional theories of causation. And after reaching a point of saturation, we'll determine a theory of action. Through data-driven discourse and using that collaborative learning cycle, we will carry on our commitment for continuous improvement. So thank you to all. I'll now turn it back to Dr. Dacey and Dr. McGowan.
Thank you, everybody, for your focus and for your attention and clearly your passion. And for all of us, this is, many of you, I'm looking at your faces, this is not our first rodeo in accreditation. Charity likes to say that I've experienced accreditation like alphabet soup. There isn't one that I haven't been a part of. It is, you know, but they're all at the heart, come back to the same exact issue, which is, do you know where you are? Do you know where you want to go? And how do you work toward getting there? And how do you do it in a systemic way? And so, Dr. Dacey, thank you for navigating us through this conversation today, and certainly to my colleagues who have been incredible stewards of this work. And we look forward to sharing, you know, now that we've gotten past the proposal stage, we're preparing our QAR right now. And our visit, as I think Dr. Dacey shared, which is in the beginning of September, in person. So we're getting back to some kind of normalcy, and we look forward to sharing the next steps of this continuous improvement journey after that. So thank you. And Jason, we'll turn it to you.
Okay. Well, I think Adriane is going to be monitoring the Q&A. So I will turn it over to Adriane, actually.
Thank you. Yes, so I don't see any questions in the chat, but is there anyone that has a question about anything that we presented or just the process of going through the AAQEP proposal and now the QAR, just in general? Oh, yes.
I was just wondering, is there, what advice might you give to someone who's thinking about switching? I mean, is there anything that you wish you would have done that only in hindsight you now realize?
So that's such a great question on so many levels. My answer to the first part would be, I think there's just an inherent risk. We all know how high stakes accreditation is in New Jersey. I certainly did not take this decision lightly. It went through multiple iterations, conversations with our president, vice president for academic affairs, with Dr. Dacey directly, our entire faculty team. This was a real owned decision about what we wanted to get out of the process. And to be honest, I think this is a real, this is, to me, as an academic leader, as the dean of a school, the hardest conversation to have is, are we doing it because we're told to do it, or are we doing it because we actually want to get something out of this on the end? And those of you who know me know that I live, eat, and breathe this entire process, right? Input, throughput, output. And if we're going to be true to what we say we're going to do, which is prepare dynamic educators and school leaders and behaviorists and every capacity that we're asked and called upon to do, I think you have to really be honest about, are you looking to just check the box and get through accreditation, which, by the way, I've been there, and sometimes that's what it has to be, right? But I think each institution has to ask themselves, are they ready to take on a new, unexperienced project? Are they willing? Do they have the resources? And by that, I mean, do you have the faith in your team that it's more than one person who does this? Do you know that you have the depth and breadth of capacity? And I mean that by willingness to become a reviewer, right? Dr. Dacey went through the entire process. She's already been on a reviewing team. So this wasn't let's jump and then ask later. These were baby steps, very informed conversations, lots of questions, a ton of negotiation, and then ultimately deciding as a School of Ed family and as an institution, it could not be we were doing this alone. It had to be that everybody agreed that the purpose in changing wasn't just to change because other people were doing it, but to make the change because we really felt strongly that it was going to help us create the path to constantly reviewing something we hold dear here, constantly reviewing data to get better, to get better, to get better.
Any other questions?
I see that accreditation brings out the best in people, right?
I have a question. You've been through both processes now with the 2 recognized accrediting bodies in New Jersey. Just kind of gut feeling about the differences, the major difference. If you could pick one thing that felt really different from the first process to the next process, what would it be?
I actually, I'm a dinosaur apparently on this call. So I have done 2 NJACTE, 1 TAC, 1 CAPE, and here we are at AAQEP. So I feel like I don't know, I'm a journeywoman of accreditation. I don't know if that's a crown of thorns or something to be rewarded, right?
I didn't want to necessarily make you go way back into.
Yeah, but it's, to be totally honest, Erica, there is a direct correlation between all of them. And I feel like they've all built upon each other. If I had to pick one, I think there's a couple, but the one major thing is the support and training. The experience we're having right now, and again, this is not a knock on somebody else, right? Or a different way of doing things. The one thing that we really craved, one of the questions that was asked from our team, particularly Dr. Dacey, was what support will we get if we decide to make this transition? Because listen, you can look over the standards, you could say, okay, well, there's a lot of similarity. Why would we go through this trouble, right? We've already jumped through this hoop. And the answer that we have experienced is that it's very much set up like a professional learning community. So all the people who are writing who are about the same size institutions, they have these writing groups that Charity spoke about earlier. They actually share parts of what they're writing with each other. It's a very, very transparent, open process. There's really very little room for, it's mine, I'm not sharing. It's just everybody who we've had the privilege of working with has really been incredibly open in sharing surveys, samples, exemplars. And so when I talk about the professional learning community, I'm really talking about the North Star. What is the exemplar? What will help me look at how someone else was successful so I can sit back and ask the important question, do we do that here? Should we do that here? How can we do that here? And by the way, if we're doing it, maybe we do it better and we actually want to share it with our colleagues, right? It models the practice in which we're asked to do. And so Dr. Dacey, did I leave anything out? I mean, I think that's probably the biggest, because standards are standards. Anybody who thinks one's easier, one's hard, I don't really buy into that hype. That's why I said I think it's really important to know who you are as an organization, to really do an honest assessment of a stock of who do you have on your team And in our case, we're so small. Everybody's on the team, right? Everybody gets a t-shirt. That's it. Everybody's in. And the truth of the matter is, from the leadership, right? From the dean's office to the adjunct, everybody has to understand the importance of this and be willing to make the commitment. And there's no light lifters. Everybody's a heavy lifter here. Dr. Dacey?
I think you really said it. There's something to be said, though. I think you really nailed it. It's just extending that idea. Context matters. Where we work, the conditions, the support, the environment, all of that does shape a lot of our daily work. And there just feels to be, and this is, you said to talk about your gut. So I'm going to use the effective word feel and say that there just is a feeling that you can authentically show who you are, what you're working on, where you're going, justifying the work, but really in that vein of like honoring the complexity of teaching, that this is something that is nuanced and it isn't just about, okay, and here's this table and here's this table. And, you know, we all are researchers. We all have studied and done dissertations, and we understand that that's truly just a driver's license to get started on research. But that research is qualitative and it's quantitative, and it has to be like poignant and real to what our students are experiencing, our faculty are experiencing, and the challenges that we all share as teacher educators, as school leaders, as behavior people who are preparing behaviors. Like all of the programs that we have, the context does matter. And AAQEP, for some reason, just feels like they take that context into account more. And that's to me, one of the defining differences.
Thank you very much.
I do want to just say though, since, you know, you talked about that gut thing, this was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made in leading a charge for accreditation, and definitely in being a dean of a school. Yeah, you know, somebody said to me, Stephanie, there's high risk, high reward. And the reality is, again, in a state where it is consequential, right? There's no room for epic failure there, right? And I think that is the driving force behind some of the decision making. And also, listen, let's be very frank about things. I am a very fortunate person. I have an incredible faculty. I have an incredible staff. I have an incredible administration, right? How lucky am I? All the stars lined up. I would be very honest and say to my fellow school leaders and anybody in the position who is leading the charge of accreditation to ask themselves that question, right? Is the risk worth the reward? For us, we felt like this was a path we wanted to take because it was going to allow us to be unapologetically, authentically Felician University. We were not trying to check off things. We were not trying to be someone else. We weren't trying to game the system. We just wanted to say who we are, what we believe in, and why we think we are worth being a part of this professional community. And you know, listen, I put my Felician pom-poms under the desk today, right? I tell people all the time, we have the best profession in the world. We are training people to go out and be life changers. It is a very, very clear mission, but it comes with high expectations and a lot of oversight. And so I would encourage it to be a team decision and not to rush to it, right? Don't do it because everybody else is doing it and you see the names who are on it and you think, wow, this is gonna be great for us and it's gonna be easier. And I promise you, it is just as hard work. But I am ridiculously blessed. I have extraordinary colleagues, and I have absolutely no doubt that come September, by the 13th, when this team leaves, that they will say, you know what, we're really glad we got selected to be on the team to go to Felician. And that's all I can ask for as a dean, and certainly any of us could hope for with continuous improvement.
Jason, I don't know if we have time for one more question.
I think we do. I think
Okay.
we're kind of wrapping up around 4 o'clock. So
Oh, okay. I thought it was 3:50. So does anyone else have a question?
3:50, but you know, if there are questions, it's a good conversation. So
Okay.
Jason, then we have to give Karen, poor Karen, like 2 more minutes because she got the short end of the stick and she had a great set of insights prepared.
Are there any other questions? And Nikki did mention that if you do have a question, you're able to unmute yourself now.
There he goes. So I had 2 general questions. One, I came in a little bit late. I don't know if this, I know y'all were recording, but is this going to be available somewhere where we can download that to kind of review it a couple of times maybe? That's a general question. My second question, I'm at Texas Tech and we have started our journey in our transition, right? We've committed to starting this journey. I myself have only been here, I completed a year in January, and I've been in similar roles. And so I know that there are always challenges with personnel, and it varies from one organization to the other based on the culture there. And so I'm kind of wondering, from your experience, as you made your transition, and I apologize if you talked about this before, but what were your biggest challenges and how kind of did you approach that when you made the announcement, we're doing this, here we go? What would you say your biggest challenges were and how did you address those?
There were 2 challenges, and I'd say one of them, Dr. McGowan navigated, and that was the negotiations with the players in New Jersey on having membership in one and moving to the second, and do you get charged, you know, membership fees in both, and are you unaccredited? Do you have to carry 2 during the, like, I would get emails like that, and I was like, I'm so scared. Like, I can't, like, that element of like being out of compliance for anything just sends me to like so she just really tackled all of the political aspects, particularly with the state of New Jersey. And that was one. The second challenge was timeline and timing. And to have this happen in such a short period of time just means that, like, you know, there's always that temptation when you don't have a big ideal timeline to like rush the process and skip steps. And I feel really very happy to be working with our group of colleagues. And that's where this, I felt like, presentation was all about. You kind of need each other to honor the process and do it right so that you don't skip steps. So you don't just present what you have, that you look at it surface level. Like, that's the piece that is a challenge, to really dig in and look below the surface level at the data. And I feel good about honoring that work, because when the accreditation process is over, we'll all still be here doing that same work and moving to the stage of making potential recommendations, potential changes. But you want to make all that energy and time that people will do to make new courses or whatever the outcome is worthwhile and based on solid data, that we're not just doing it, you know, a flurry of activity that isn't purposeful, that isn't based on true data. So that's been, the timeline can be a challenge, but I really do believe it's doable.
Gilbert, if I could add on that, as somebody who did accreditation at an institution that I wasn't at a very long time, right? I literally was brought in the 11th hour to help them move accreditation, right? Yeah, I feel you. And when I was listening to your question, I wanted to give you a hug, because I understand what that feels like, right? You're still trying to actually learn the players and the landscape, and somehow you're supposed to have this 30,000 view foot view about what's the status of the institution, status of resources, status of programming, success of candidates, right? And you're still trying to figure out how people get through the program. My suggestion would be this. I think it is critical, particularly if you're in this role, to, as Charity stated, spend time talking to members from across all of the disciplines that are represented in the School of or College of Education. I think it is critical to ask questions such as, where are our teachers teaching? How many of them get jobs when they leave, right? If you want quick data about whether or not your candidates are successful in your program and that you're matching the needs of the community you serve, the answer is going to be on the output end, right? That's the quick hit. The harder conversation is when you start looking at the data and you start asking yourself the questions such as, okay, we know what the flaws are for the people who have struggled coming through the program. How can we mitigate that in the beginning? What infrastructure do we need? What type of, when we talk about retention, are we talking about retention university-wide and ensuring that students register? Or are we talking about the retention and support specific to teacher education or ed leadership or any of our professional preparation programs? What are we doing, right? Charity and I spent a great deal, and this would be my last call for you. Really define for yourself the difference between quality assurance, right, and your assessment system. I would argue that after all these years doing it, I still have to check myself. I will walk into Charity's office and go, okay, I'm looking at this. And my first instinct is to say, we're not assessing properly because how did the student get there? But the question I probably should be asking, right, is what mechanisms could we install that ensure greater success for our students? Because at the end of the day, it's not waiting for them to be successful or fail. It's about what are we doing in the process as I define continuous improvement. What does the data tell us? What did COVID do to teacher education that we think is happening, but we don't know yet because the lagging indicators are just getting ready to graduate, right? Those are the conversations I would say as a new person to an institution. Find those key people that can help you understand the ebb and flow of the program. Step back and ask yourself, do I have clarity on the difference between these two things? Because they may look the same, but they're not, right? And then ultimately, really, I think if you focus on those hurdles, right? The quality control system, if you look at the hurdles, it becomes, you start coming out of that 30,000 foot view and you start getting closer to the assessment, which gets you closer to the student and ultimately helps you answer the question growth over time. And that's the goal for all of us, I think, at the end of the day. I hope that was helpful. And you're more than welcome to contact us at any point, Gilbert, and we'll share with you our experiences and hopefully some of it will be beneficial.
Okay, well, that's about all the time that we have for today. So thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Felician University, for a wonderful presentation, because I know we're all extremely curious about the AAQEP process. So thank you for assembling this team and putting this together and letting us all know. Gilbert, I think you did ask that this, to answer your first question, this is being recorded, and Amy, this will be available on our website. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Oh, you can't unmute?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Oh, now I am. Okay, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, we will make the videos available. I'm trying, but I'll communicate, with, as long as you're registered and you're on the list of registrants. If you've been registered, then you'll get an email from me telling you where the videos are. And then I can share the slides if speakers are consent to that. Okay,
absolutely. Good. And I know Dr. Dacey's information's on there, and I'm ridiculously says if you visit our website, you can find all of us. We're pretty easy to find, and And we welcome, any of our colleagues that have questions or just need some assistance. This is our professional community. And thank you to NJACTE for fostering this ridiculously important discussion about assessment. So thank you.
Okay, so with that, thank you, everyone. Good to see everyone, and we'll be seeing you soon. Bye.